Hi everybody, this is Greg Tiener for The Mindful Eye and The Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Bob. Bob is an advanced photographer. He shot this on the California coast at Marin Headlands. Bob says he shot this shortly before sunrise, shooting away from the east. So he's shooting sort of northwest in softer light, more of an ambient light. I call this the western sunrise. And Bob says that he shot this with a Nikon D300. With a 12 to 24 millimeter zoom lens at 18 millimeters at ISO 100, stop down to f16, expose the file for 2 seconds. Two interesting things about filters. Even though this is shooting in a soft light direction in the morning, there's still a lot of contrast here. Clouds are in direct front light. This is in the shade. So Bob used a 3-stop soft step split neutral density filter. Dark up here, then the soft step means there's a subtle graduation into clear resin or glass down here to help to even out the exposure. Bob also says that he used a warming polarizer. Here's the sun probably shining in this direction, and Bob is shooting sort of almost directly away from the sun. And if we shoot straight into the sun or straight away from the sun, the polarizer, in terms of doing what we typically think of it doing, which is getting rid of glare, doesn't do much. It works most of its polarizing magic at a 90-degree angle to our light source. Bob says he put the polarizer on here to slow the shutter down so he could get to 2 seconds. And at full polarization, the polarizer will block about 2 stops of light. And that's one of the things I love about this shot, is this shutter speed on this water. If we shoot a quarter of a second, eighth of a second, or faster on water in a big landscape shot, will freeze a lot of the pattern and the idea of contrast in the water. And there's so much contrast in moving water, it can just visually overwhelm everything else, with high contrast being one of the most visually heavy things. 2 seconds has softened that contrast, but 2 seconds has also left this really beautiful, subtle texture and quality of moving line in the water. And what's so gorgeous about it is not only simplifies the image, it also rhymes the quality of line and texture in the clouds. And from a conceptual standpoint, the softness of the texture of the water rhymes the soft pastel colors and the soft ambient light shooting away from the sun in the morning. Lots of other elements of visual design that are working very well here. This beautiful wedge of the headlands rhymes the wedge of the repeating clouds, both in the positive and negative space shapes. You've just got a whole series of wedges here that just keep coming down into the image. And these diagonals are cross-hatching, which is very dynamic. There's a really beautiful balance that's going on here, this dynamic with the wedge of the headlands and then this wedge down here of the rocks along the coast. These two ideas sort of bookend and rhyme each other, and then that forms this sort of wedge of the water, wedge of the clouds, and then this wedge up here, kind of a whole series of triangles that are playing off of each other. And I love the way this triangle helps to push back. Up here, the pastel orange clouds push back against all this energy coming this way. There's a lot of energy moving out in this direction, and then this pushes back. Really nice balance. And the other thing that I'll mention here is if you're shooting these big scenics with a wide angle lens and you're trying to work traditionally and shoot beautiful things beautifully, leading line is just such a critical element of visual design. And boy, does Bob have it here. He has this gorgeous C curve that starts in the bottom left hand corner and then arcs all the way around and hooks up with the clouds and just takes us all the way through the image. So really beautiful leading line here. In a perfect world, what I'd like to do here is just create another variation. I love Bob's shot. I like it just the way that it is. This version is very open. There's a lot of detail everywhere, and this is what I'd like to do to this. I'd like to make it a lot moodier. I'd like to make it feel a lot more like I'm standing there in very early twilight, and I'm standing in this dark shadow surrounded by dark rocks and darker water, and the light that's very bright out here is flowing into that in a very dramatic way. I'd also like to simplify the right-hand side of the image a little bit. There's so much contrast and pattern and texture in this part that it overwhelms me a little bit. I'd like it for it to feel a little bit more like this. Rock, one big anchor, visual unity idea. Rock, water, sky. And I'd like to do that by coming in, getting rid of some contrast in here, making it darker. I'd like to do something to this from a color standpoint. I'd like to give it a little bit more color depth. Right now I look and it's like washed out cyan and then all the colors up here. This is what I'd like to do from a color standpoint. I'd like to add some color in some places and take it away, and I don't just want to just do that flying by the seat of my pants. I want to think about visual design. I'd love to create a little more depth here, so I'd like to think about that. Here's another way that I think about color. I'll look at subjects and I'll ask myself, what does this subject mean relative to the rest of the shot? And the water is very dynamic, very ethereal. Clouds very ethereal. Here's your anchor. These rocks and these mountains don't move much. And things that are anchors from a color standpoint in a color file, a lot of times things that anchor the image from a color standpoint are places where they're color neutral, black, white, gray. I'd love to push this more. Let me get rid of this for a second so I can do this again. I'd love to push all this more towards a color neutral. Leave this as blue, so you kind of get this archetype of water being blue, rock solid anchor, and then I'd love to reflect a little bit more of this warmth into this area and leave this blue. Blue and blue bookend each other, warm in the middle, anchoring more of a gray. And so we're inside of Photoshop so you can see the layers. I know I've promised this a couple of other times. If I live to the end of the week, then it'll become a reality. I'm going to just turn the eyeballs and the layers on and off here and show you what I did so we can keep the critique. I'm trying to keep these to sort of 10 minutes or less. I'm going to do a longer video in the digital darkroom where I show you all my detail work here, and we'll get that up towards the end of this week. First layer, what I did was digital gardening, got rid of some contrast down in here. There's a little blemish, maybe a water droplet on a filter or something. I'm going to get rid of both of those things on this layer using the spot healing brush and the clone stamp. So that's before, that's after. This is a huge change to the image. This is the part where I'm going to create a lot more mood, and I did this using curves, and when we look at the digital darkroom episode on this, I'll show you why I put the points on the curve where I did. But for now, we're just going to turn this on, and remember, this is to make it look more like I'm standing in a very dark area, and the light is in a dramatic way flowing from that beautiful twilight color in the background into where I'm standing. The next thing that I did was I created a blank layer, went to soft light blending mode, painted with black at a very low opacity. So I'm blending black pixels in this part of the image to at one time make it darker. Because of the way I'm doing it, I'm also going to cut down on contrast. And so here's what that looks like. Again, just trying to visually unify the whole idea of rock in the right-hand side of the image. The next thing that I did was in the high middle ground out in here. See, I've added a lot of low end to this part in here, and I want to sort of keep that consistent until we get out to the light. And it's starting to flatten out for me in the middle ground. So I'm going to turn on a curves layer where I added more low end to some of those areas that are almost black already, and just giving a little bit more to that part of the image. And so I'm going to go ahead and now turn on these other layers. I'm going to turn on a layer where I did the color work that I talked about. And let me turn this off. Here I want to go slow. I really want you to see this because it's subtle, and we'll get more into it in the digital darkroom. For now, I just want to show you the change I made. I made this warmer, I left this cool, and I pushed this more towards a color neutral. And you can just see what you think about the difference it makes. It is very subtle, but there's the change. So there's before, and there's after. And for me, this makes a huge difference in the way I move in different places of the image. It really starts to create a lot more depth for me on the left-hand side of the image. And it creates more of an exciting transition from the cool water going out towards the cool part of the sky. There's before, and there's after. And I actually did that using curves, a new feature inside of curves, a white balance feature that's very, very cool. And I'll get into that in the digital darkroom version. Just a big vignetting mask, making the top and the bottom and the edges, you can see it on the mask, darker to contain the eye. And then the last thing, just more local contrast in the whites to give this even more sing, and to make it even look a little bit more like that bright light in the background is sort of being reflected off of the most specular things in the foreground. Here's where we started, and here is where we ended up. A stunning image from Bob. I want to say a big thank you to him for sharing this beautiful coastal scenic with us, and we will see you tomorrow, hopefully, on the Daily Critique. Thanks a lot, everybody.